Good morning. Welcome to Let's Talk, Conversations on Advanced Care Planning. I'll invite our speakers to unmute and make themselves visible. I'm Gretchen Hartley, the president of the Vancouver Island Federation of Hospices, and we're bringing today's event to you. The Federation of Hospices represents 11 community hospices and hospice programs from all across our island region. Advanced care planning is a process of thinking, talking, and recording your wishes for care if you're unable to make decisions for yourself. Advanced care planning starts simply with a conversation, and that's really what we're going to do today, talking about this important part of life planning. We hope that the conversation today serves as an invitation to follow up with your local hospice, to start your own plan, or to move ahead with a plan that you've already started to work on. So as I said, today we'll be planning, today we'll be talking with 3 advanced care planning experts from Vancouver Island, who I'll introduce in a moment. We look forward to conversation with you in the second half of the hour. You can post your questions and comments at any time, either through the Q&A box if you're on Zoom, or in the comment section if you're on Facebook. At the end of our time together, we'll have a draw for a $100 gift card from Country Grocer. Thank you for joining us. So with us today are Dr. Amy Tan, who's a family practitioner and a medical director at Victoria Hospice. You can give a wave to make sure you're in the spotlight. Marg is a retired RN who volunteers with Cowichan Hospice and offers advanced care planning support and training. You give us a wave.
There we go.
Understand that helps us be visible on Facebook if we wave. There you go. And Tracy Head is a volunteer at Pacific Rim Hospice, and she's a chef on the West Coast.
Good morning.
So let's dive into the questions for our panelists, and we'll open the conversation up afterwards to comments and questions from you folks. So why is advanced care planning important to you? And I'm interested in hearing from each of the panelists. Perhaps Dr. Tan, you could start us off.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So advanced care planning is important to me from many different realms and perspectives. So I have been a family physician and a hospice doctor for 17 years. So as a family physician, I have seen and had relationships with patients where we're outside of a healthcare crisis and able to have more upstream conversations, because when I take care of patients in the hospice, which is very much more downstream in an illness trajectory, it is there where every day I'm reminded about why it's so important that we talk about what's important to patients in terms of their goals and their wishes with regards to what they want in terms of living and how that can guide any treatment options. And it's not about looking at a crystal ball. It's really about focusing on the values and the big picture goals that a person has and helping to achieve those goals through medical treatment. And so I see both the beginning and closer to the end in terms of decision making and why that's so important. Some of the hardest cases that I've had, unfortunately, has been because we didn't have a clear idea of what the patient wanted. And more importantly, the surrogate decision makers didn't have a good idea. And so it's so distressing for families. And I think it also then perhaps leads to a ripple effect of complicated grief and PTSD for people who are left to pick up the pieces after somebody passes away that's a loved one. So I think it's important from all those perspectives. And then personally, it's important because when I was in my 20s and I just graduated med school and just gotten married, I was in a near-death car accident where I'm very lucky to be alive and able to walk because I broke my back in several places. And my husband of 3 months at the time had to make very big healthcare decisions on my behalf because for about 3 days, I wasn't able to make decisions. And so this, I think, underscores it's not just about end of life. It's about anytime you can't make decisions for yourself, reversible or irreversible, that having these conversations is really important, because it was already a stressful time for my husband to get the call at work that your wife is under a bridge, but to then have to make decisions. So that's what fuels me as well.
Under duress. Thank you. Marg, why is advanced care planning important in your experience?
Well, a wise person once said, a life well planned is a life well lived. And I'm very grateful to advanced care planning for enabling me to be able to plan my life to live well to the end. That's very important to me. Through my hospice experiences and facilitating workshops, helping clients complete plans, witnessing the experiences of others, and completing my own personal plan, I've learned firsthand that advanced care planning has many benefits for me. First of all, having my plan gives me peace in knowing my core values and knowing that I have a well-prepared support team who will do their best to ensure my end-of-life wishes are carried out. It gives me solace knowing that my plan is a living work in progress that can be changed anytime I want, as long as I can still speak for myself. And secondly, I know that an advanced care plan is the best gift I can give to my family and friends. The knowledge they're carrying out my wishes and will bring them comfort and reduce their stress at this very difficult and sad time. It'll also avoid bedside arguments that Dr. Tan talked about that occur when uninformed family members have differing views about care options. Thirdly, it's a gift to the healthcare system, avoiding the waste of precious resources on unwanted treatments and enabling staff to feel good about giving me the care that I want. And finally, it's a gift for my family, friends, and neighbors. As I progress in my planning, I often share my experiences with others, encouraging them to make advanced care plans and enjoy the benefits I've just mentioned. Though creating a plan took me a bit of time and thought, it's been well worth the effort.
Thank you, Marg. Tracy, why is advanced care planning important to you?
From my experience, especially living in a small remote community with there's a lot of people here that have moved from somewhere else. And so those people that would automatically become your decision makers might not be the people that have been in your life, that kind of know how your ideas or opinions have changed. And so that's one of the reasons I think it's important to have that plan in place, because because you've made this community of family with people that might not necessarily be on that decision-making list, but they know you best and you want them to speak for you. So so that is kind of a part of it for me. And also, being a chef, I plan my entire day, and we plan so many things, but this is one thing that's inevitable, that people are really hesitant to plan. And having a plan in place just allows you to be at a point where you can spend quality time with the people you love and that you want around you without having to see them go through trying to make these decisions about your healthcare because you haven't had that talk. Or as a patient, taking extra steps and extra treatments to try and make and calm down those loved ones that are around you, because you don't want to see them in pain and grieving about something that you're going through in your healthcare. And so I found, doing research on advanced care planning, I found that really interesting, that we as a patient are more willing to go through procedures that we think will make our family feel better at that end of life. Where if you have that conversation earlier on, it just allows you to spend more quality time together, just being together, rather than having to go through the deliberation of making decisions. So so being remote and removed, we especially out here need to be more responsible for our healthcare and the direction we want to see it take, because we also would have to leave our community at that end of life care, because we don't have that here. So there's just, I think it's just important to have that plan in place and have that conversation with the people you love, and know that your wishes are being heard. And it just alleviates a lot of, like Dr. Tan was saying, a lot of stress and a lot of grief that you might go through had you not had that conversation. And you'd be amazed at how many things you learn about a partner or a parent that you would be surprised that you actually want that. It's like, really? That's important to you? Wow, I didn't know. So it also, it brings people closer together.
Great, thank you. It's a really nice picture from all angles of why it's important. So can you talk a little bit, well, I think Amy, you've started to talk about your experience of talking about advanced care planning, or why it was important to talk about it with your family. Can you talk a little bit about how that went, what that was like?
So I didn't have an advanced care plan when I really needed it in my 20s, but my husband and I have definitely learned from that, and it's an ongoing conversation. We'll see something on the news and we'll talk about it, and we'll say, what would you want if this were to have happened? Or we'll watch a TV show or a Netflix show and we'll talk about these issues. So I always joke, because this is my academic interest and I research it. So I probably talk about and think about it more than most people, but my husband is not in medicine and he comes along for the ride. Where we'll pause something on a Netflix show and I'll be like, so what do you think of this? And what do you think of that decision-making process? I also have a backup surrogate decision maker, and that's my sister. And she lives in Boston. And so we have very cool conversations as well. And I think it's really important. It's not about the actual decisions, because we can't predict the future. It's about really talking about what is so integral to you and what you define as quality of life. And again, probably because of what I do at work, I am several people's surrogate decision makers, and it's a privilege, because I have learned stuff about my brother-in-law that I never would have had I not embarked in these conversations. And so I think it was Tracy who said, you learn a lot, and there's some of the most satisfying personal conversations you have. So I really encourage people to not be afraid of it. It's really about finding out what makes that person tick. And it is an intimate conversation, but it's lovely. And I also have the privilege of having such conversations with patients, and it's so fulfilling to be able to have the privilege to be able to have a peek into a person's life and mind and their families.
Be in that space. Marg, what was it like to talk about advanced care planning with your husband?
Well, first of all, for myself, after having been funded to attend a weekend workshop in Vancouver, I felt pretty compelled to make my advanced care plan. When I talked about it after I completed it, I offered to share it with my husband, because he was one of my temporary decision maker, my substitute decision maker, actually. And he stated that he was happy to help, but he didn't want to discuss the details. He's a quite kind, caring person. He doesn't like to watch sad movies. And he probably wouldn't be watching those Netflix shows that give those situations. So, but later we did make progress. He told me he still didn't want to discuss the details, but he wanted me to write him up one of those plans too. And he would have what I was having. And so our plans are still a work in progress, and it's a gentle work in progress because he's not ready to talk about those things. So I tend to talk a lot about experiences that I'm currently having and how things have worked and how they haven't worked. And that's how we're starting through our conversation. Also, a little while ago, we came acquainted with the idea of a joy list, figuring out what brings you joy. And that's been a really good takeoff for looking at advanced care planning, because that's really what it's based on. In contrast, I just wanted to share an experience that I recently had with a hospice client who I'll call Jane to protect her identity. She, on the other hand, totally embraced the process of advanced care planning. She had no trouble figuring out what was important, creating a joy list. And although she planned to die at home, she realized that her husband, due to his declining health, wouldn't be able to care for her. So she opted for hospice. When her health suddenly declined and she was admitted to hospice, it turned out that her husband found it. Oh, and I'll just backtrack a little bit. She was disappointed because her daughter was unable to be her decision maker. And her daughter lived in a province far away, and she didn't feel that due to COVID, she could be at her daughter's bedside, and therefore she wasn't going to be able to make decisions, important decisions about health. So instead, she picked her husband and a good friend. When her health declined and she ended up in hospice, it turned out that her husband found it very difficult to see his wife so ill, very difficult to visit in hospice, and very difficult to be around her family and her friends. On the other hand, her friend turned out to was able to be at Jane's bedside. She acted as a mediator and a really good support for her to the end. And when I visited her in hospice, she said she was so grateful she'd made her plan and that she no longer could do anything on her joy list, and so was opting for comfort measures, which, by the way, included drinking red wine and having a spa tub. I believe that the advanced care planning really helped Jane to live well to the end, and I consider that it helped make miracles happen. I don't think her family and friends would have been comfortable visiting her at home, given her husband's challenges. At hospice, they could visit freely as often as they wanted, and it provided the opportunity for her son to reconcile a long-time issue with his mother, fulfilling one of her dying wishes. So I say, thank goodness for advanced care planning. Thanks.
Thank you, Marg. And you've spoken a little bit to our next question as well about who to choose. So Tracy, do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to talk with those you consider family, those close to you, about advanced care planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I actually going and doing the research for this presentation, I realize I have 2 advanced care plans, neither of which are completed, but both are works in progress. And some of the values in them that I've put are different, so because I'd written them at different times. And so when I first had the conversation with not only my husband but some very dear friends of mine, I had designated a very good friend as a decision maker for me and not my partner, because I just didn't want to put that pressure on him. You know, he has not had good experiences in the past with the passing of his own father and the medical community, and so there was a lot of baggage that came with assigning him, and I just felt like it was undue pressure. Whereas the friend that I had made a decision maker is a doctor and also shares a lot of similar views on healthcare and alternative therapies as myself. And so I kind of took the approach of seeing what treatments are out there, looking at I took a very clinical approach to it when I looked at the values and the things that I wanted at end of life. So I it was conversations that I could easily have with her about, feeding tubes and resuscitation and all of these things. And so having someone that I could be more practical with made it also more comfortable for me to have that talk about end of life and have it be have it be a little more practical, because I'm a practical person and not the emotions. And still being able to have that conversation with my partner. And now, because we've been together for as long as we have, because I, like Dr. Tan, really enjoy the topic and find it very interesting, and bring it up a lot more than he would probably like. But he's become more comfortable with it. And so now him and I have started having a conversation about him speaking for me and things that he'll be comfortable with. And also in turn doing his own. So, it was like Marg said, it's just having that conversation, just sitting down and starting it is just it opens up so many doors to having peace of mind at a time when you will want it the most.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you pointing to the fact that it is an ongoing process, and people's comfort with it changes over time, and what we need to do, in terms of writing it down or sharing it with people, there needs to be a little bit of open-endedness with that, I think. So I guess we've talked a little bit about this, about difficulties in choosing a decision maker, or challenges. Were there any questions that we haven't touched on, Dr. Tan, in terms of choosing your husband as your primary decision maker? Do you have a secondary one? That's also a question.
Yeah, so I do. I have my sister who is a secondary one. So I encourage my patients to have a person and then a backup, but I really actually discourage having a whole list of like all children in the family, because I find pragmatically as the physician, it's impossible not only to get people on the same page perhaps, but more like the logistics of scheduling a meeting, like a family meeting where 5 decision makers have to be there. And invariably from the on the ground pragmatic perspective, it's actually impractical. And so I actually have that conversation with my patients. So when I can speak to, as a physician, helping my patients choose the right decision maker, I actually say to medical students that I teach about advanced care planning, I actually say, if you do one thing right, you will have made an impact on your patient, and you may never know it because it might not be utilized for 20 or 30 years. But if you help your patient make the right surrogate decision maker decision for them, you will have impacted their care for the good. And I ask patients to think about somebody you trust to be able to not only enact what you want to enact, even if it's different from what they would want themselves. So they have to be able to do that, separate what they want from what you want, but they need to be able to speak up to it and advocate. And so it needs to be a person who can make decisions under stressful circumstances and be able to advocate to potential people in the family or friends who might be giving them a hard time about that. And so that's just from years of seeing surrogate decision makers struggle and talk, that's what, and available. They need to be available. And to be honest, in this now with the pandemic, we're learning like, Zoom calls are okay. They're not ideal, but they can be done. But they can't be in Antarctica where you can't reach them, type of thing.
That's great. Let's go to the next question, which is, now that you've created a plan, who needs to know about it? Tracy, would you like to start?
Sure. So with the advanced care plan, once you need to tell the person that you'd like to speak for you, they need to know about it, which might seem obvious. However, I can speak from personal experience. I was a surprise executor to a will. I had no idea. I was living out of province. And they just decided and written it down and not told anyone. And so, you need to, first of all, let that person know. You need to let your physician know. People in your house, it's good to let them know and let them know where it is and where you've put it. And there's a handy little wallet card that comes with the advanced care plan that you can keep on your person, so that if you're and so then you can always have it around. So yeah, those are the people that you want to know. You can go as far as letting, if there's legal ramifications to some of your stuff, you could definitely let your lawyer know. But yeah, it's letting the person that you want speaking for you, letting them know, your loved ones, and your healthcare professionals that you deal with, letting them know.
Marg, can you add to that list? Have you?
I think that's a great list, and I think the really important thing is sharing with family and friends, and not just the person who's the decision maker, but the other people as well, so they aren't shocked to think, well, why did she pick them and not me, that kind of thing, because you can avoid so much trauma, as Dr. Tan was talking about, over dying. You can really help make that a family uniting process instead of one where rifts occur. So yeah, I think that's the only thing I'd have to add. And also, I think just that whole thing of, it's so important that people understand your wishes, because we don't know what kind of healthcare will be available, what kind of decisions they'll have to make. But if they know you well and you've talked to them a lot, they'll be comfortable in making those decisions. Yeah, because it's never black and white.
It's never black and white. Dr. Tan, could you speak briefly to, I think sometimes people assume, my doctor punched it into the computer and now everybody knows, community home care knows, the ambulance driver knows. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So actually on the island, we're actually getting closer to a place where that actually could happen, because the advanced care plan, the MOST designation, so the medical order for sustained treatment, is now operationalized live online on PowerChart, which is where we look at patients' charts and information in the acute care system. So your individual family doctor's system doesn't speak to it right now. So we're getting there, but we're not quite there. And that's why.
Do you know if emergency responders can access PowerChart?
To be honest, I don't know yet, because I'm fairly new to BC, so I don't actually know that answer. So I apologize that I don't know that answer. I can answer that in Alberta, but I can't here, sorry. So yeah. I will have to defer that one to somebody who can speak to that. But you also can print off your advanced care plan and have it in your home as well, so that can help as well. But that's why it's really important that the people around you, the people who you be calling first and foremost, know what's going on as well, because it really is that informational continuity of that information that's really important as well.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, and some people talk sometimes about having a copy on the fridge if it's a question of an ambulance at home, but having something with you, like a card or. But your people are the most important.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we're going to turn now to our wonderful audience. Unseen and unheard so far, but people have been putting some questions and comments in the chat box. Thank you, panel. Before we leave the panel, well, I'll be coming back to you with questions. I'll save my question. So Griff Tripp wrote in and said, and this is perhaps a question for Dr. Tan, do you find that people maintain the same views in advanced planning as when they're actually in hospice? And if they change, which items tend to change?
Wow, that's a good question. So I wish I could do an anthropological study of 17 years of this, but you know what, to be honest, because I really emphasize core values and what's important to a patient, they don't change as much because they're their person's values. And it might be that some of the details or the operationalizing of a plan is different. But most people are able to paint, similar to what Marg was saying about daily joys, are able to paint a picture of a distilled day for them and what's important for a good day for them in its most distilled form. And you know, so whether or not a person, let's say, has a medical condition that now has them on home O2 or in a wheelchair, that kind of falls out of it, because if it's like, I want to be able to enjoy conversations with my loved ones and sit in the garden and feel the sun on my face, we can make that happen in a hospital bed. Right. So I find that some of those details, they kind of fall to the wayside when I really help them say, in an essence, what is a good day for you, and paint that picture so that we can, as a team, your loved ones, your healthcare providers, in that future state, whenever that is, because we can't predict, what does that look like, so that we can actually keep that as kind of our guiding light as to, will these healthcare decisions help us to best achieve that goal for them?
Thank you. Sally is asking how, and this is a little bit more of a technical question, I'm going to post this one to Marg. How are representation agreements and advanced care plans connected? I have a rep agreement.
Well, there's two kinds of rep agreements. There's a Rep 9 and a Rep 7. So the Rep 9 agreement appoints your substitute decision maker, and they can only do healthcare decisions, and they have a fair amount of latitude, as I understand it, in the healthcare decisions they can make. If it's a Rep 7, it has some financial decisions and some healthcare decisions. So oftentimes, for example, if someone were injured and needed some assistance on occasion, like perhaps they had some minor cognitive abilities and some motion difficulties, then Rep 7 would allow someone to be able to come in and perhaps help them with their banking and their groceries and paying the rent, and would be able to make some healthcare decisions, like taking them to the doctor and things like that. But some of the really key end of life decisions, they wouldn't be able to do. So they sort of have two different purposes in a way. Yeah.
And so
Similar.
I guess the difference between a representation agreement, which appoints someone to make decisions, and the advanced care plan is that the advanced care plan lays out specific wishes that, and it's essentially legally binding at that point, is my understanding. The representation agreement is appointing a decision maker who may be guided by all the conversation you've had, maybe by something written. Which trumps, though, Dr. Tan, when both of those legal agreements are in place, which would trump? So if there is a direction in an advanced care plan and an appointed decision maker said, no, that's not what you said to me, do you know which would trump in that case?
So on paper, and this is where everything is gray, and this actually is the type of circumstance that inspired my master's thesis on decision making and conflicts with surrogate decision makers, when I had a lot of moral distress with what I knew my patients' desires were, but surrogate decision makers, when I had to turn to them because the patient could no longer make decisions, would actually be in direct opposition to what the patient wanted. So it's actually much more gray and practically, because you're talking to a person. And yes, you have a piece of paper or you have a previously documented conversation. And yes, you would think you're legally covered or bound to be able to enact. But when you have a surrogate decision maker who's a human being at the bedside, it's not that way. In an ideal situation, you'd be helping the surrogate decision maker work through that conflict as to what is going on. Why is it that they aren't honoring their loved one's wishes? And I say confronting, not in a confrontational way, but really, actually having to name it for, why is this happening? And that's why I'm such a proponent of all the upstream things. If we pick the right decision maker, if we have these conversations, those things won't happen by and large. Mm-hmm. So I find, and this is again what spurred my entire research academic career, was the first risk factor for that to happen is actually not having advanced care planning, in fact. So having all those things in alignment, but having all the prep work done is what actually leads to that not happening. So I know I kind of answered the question more with how to avoid it, but hopefully.
I think that's a good answer, an important answer. And it does come back to information and conversation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And preparation.
So back to Tracy's comments, Zoe Kirk says, I've laminated several wallet cards, and she has one in her car, on her bike, and on the fridge. Oh, I know, my bike. Having recently ended up in the ditch a few weeks ago. So Tina Schoen asks, what if some of my family disagree with the decision of my representative? I think we've actually just kind of touched on that the challenge is there, but I think Dr. Tan, can you speak to your experience in mediating a little bit?
Yeah, I feel like that's what I do a lot as a palliative care doc. And it really is having family meetings and going. What I've found, and through my research, but my clinical practice, is a lot of it is really different loved ones at different stages of acceptance, but also different stages of having processed their own emotions. So really it ends up being about helping the family members process their own individual reactions to what's happening, plus anticipatory grief, plus their own fears and their own past experiences, and then being able to kind of work through that to then be able to make a decision for the loved one. You can imagine though how challenging that is if you are under some time pressure to make decisions, which again underscores why we need to do this ahead of time. Yeah. I feel like I'm a bit of a broken record. I'm sorry, but really, and that probably speaks to why, this week I had 3 such conversations. So it really fuels my, for people that I'm consulting on for the first time. So it really fuels my passion to say we need to be having these conversations like they're normal conversations, because they're about what's important to a person, what makes a person tick, what does a person value. It's not about actually death. It's about the essence of what is important to them.
It is talking about life. It's talking about living. Yeah. There's some questions, folks, I probably won't get to them all, but we'll make sure we do reply to you by email if we're not getting to you during this conversation. Someone asked about the advanced care plan card that you referred to, Tracy.
Right.
Where do you find it?
So when you have the advanced care plan book, My Voice, it's actually just on the back, right there, and you can just cut it out, and yeah, you could get fancy and laminate it. Yeah, and it's reach out to your local hospice. They do a lot more things. Like, I mean, us out here, especially because we don't have the long-term care, and the hospice is a really good resource for, for this My Voice, for the advanced care plan. We're here. We're happy to set you up with the book, talk to you about it, walk you through the things. And because it can be overwhelming to have to fill out forms and documents and the legal speak and all of those things. So yeah, it's just one page at a time, and start with those, like we've been talking about, those values, that list of, today I need 10 things to have a good day, and these are the only 10 things I need. And that's a great place to start.
Thank you. And so there will be a list of resources at the end. And I know that the BC Centre for Palliative Care has just released a new planning tool, because someone here asked when the new version of My Voice is coming out. And so it's a really, the tool that I had a quick look at yesterday really helps you think about values first and work through a process. And again, local hospices have all kinds of wonderful resources in terms of workshops and one-to-one support and different exercises to think and plan. So really encourage people to reach out to your local community hospice to find out what's there. So there's a question about care and hospice. There's which I think we'll answer, we'll write to you about that one. So could you repeat who's made aware of one's advanced decision-making plan? And just that question again, once again, who it's important to let know. So we heard, of course, your physician, but really key, I heard from all of you, is have the conversation with those who will be reached out to be decision makers, whether it's to say, actually, I've appointed a different decision maker and you should know that that's the go-to person, or, you know, and these are the kinds of things we've talked about, or whether that's the decision maker. And so, you know, some of the people that will be acting in terms of your own healthcare, here, there's a list suggesting paramedics, nurses, physicians. They don't necessarily have access to your plan unless you give it to them or speak it with them. Go ahead.
So I also would encourage, so, you know, oftentimes advanced care plans get enacted in the hospital, but I would really encourage, and I would hope that, you know, some of these conversations are starting with your family doctor in the community. And so really making sure your family doctor is aware, because if you were to be admitted into MERS, because the systems don't talk, and again, ideal situation, the admitting doctor would be contacting the family doctor to say, hi, is there anything I need to know about this patient? And generally family doctors, the first thing we will think to do is to send the designation orders and any pertinent information about decision-making. I would also say that if you are under the care of several different consultants, like a cardiologist or a respirologist or endocrinologist, etc. Again, because it's really about focusing on what's important to you and decision-making treatments. It's not about just death. They should know too, right? Because, you know, whether or not you want dialysis or whether or not you want this drug that makes you feel really crappy but sustains your life, those are actually all part of the same conversation. And so I think part of that normalization, and as a physician training physicians, this is what I'm trying to do with our culture, because we like to talk about cure and not cure. And as a palliative care doctor, I'm like, I can't cure anybody, but I can care for everybody. And this is part of that. We can care for everybody in the way that they want to be cared for, with the goals that they have in mind.
That's great. Thank you. So a question, where can we get advanced care planning package? And again, reaching out to your local hospice as a resource is a great place to start. And then, yeah, making sure you do have the conversation with your family physician. Someone asked, what if you don't have a family physician? Who do you let know, I think is the question there.
So then, you know, if you have a nurse practitioner who's helping, if you have a home care nurse, if you have, again, really talking to the people in your life, in your inner circle, that's going to be the most important. Think about the person who's going to be accompanying you to the emergency room or the hospital. They're the people we're going to be talking to if you can't talk or you can't make decisions at that moment.
That's great. So there's a little bit of advice here from Garth Walbridge, who is a lawyer. He says, if you have a new life partner or some other major change in your life, be sure to look at your directive and your, also, of course, your will and your enduring power of attorney to make changes. And, you know, I guess that's not always top of mind in that romantic new stage of life, but That's good advice. Okay. So we have, just let me look here. Another question. A little bit about on the legal side of things. I have a power of attorney in Ontario that appoints someone to make healthcare decisions for me. Is this legal in BC? Anyone know? Marg, go.
I don't believe it is. All the different provinces have different legislation, so you should update things if you move provinces for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But if you're an Ontarian and you happen to have to require medical care here, again, like the legal document, and I know that there are lawyers, so I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but there's a legal framework, but there's also the ethical, and then there's the human framework and the pragmatics of on the ground. And so if there's an Ontarian with a surrogate decision maker documented within their legal framework and they're attending a BC healthcare facility, we will still go through the same process of, it might not be that there's a legal standing, but we will use that as information to say, okay,
that was the intent. And
yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah. Okay, a question. What documents are needed to avoid CPR if I'm found unconscious, having been that way for an unknown length of time?
Sorry,
What documents are needed to avoid CPR if I'm found unconscious, having been that way for an unknown length of time?
I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I'm happy for somebody else to answer the question.
Go for it. With the doctor.
So that question is multi-layered as a physician. So if in fact it is so people will try to start CPR on any person that is found unresponsive. But if there are signs that it's been a while, we know that it's unfortunately quite unlikely that we will be able to revive the patient. The best thing is to have on your person, so in your wallet, something that, like that card that Tracy was talking about that says that you don't want CPR. And I think there was another question about in BC, it's called the MOST designation. So that's medical orders of scope of treatment. And there's 6 categories, and it's really a starting point, and it's a doctor's orders, but it's really a starting point. There's 3 categories. There's basically one category that says you want CPR, and then there's another category for intubation. But really it's about saying the designation is not the one with CPR, but you can also make it very clear in your ID that you don't want CPR. So that's really the best way. We're not really advocating for bracelets or like a medical alert bracelet or anything like that. Because of privacy, to be honest. And we asked patients actually in Alberta whether or not that was something that would be helpful or have it on their ID, like on, a medical alert type bracelet. And a lot of people were very worried about the misperception that could potentially have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Here's an interesting question. Should we be talking to our children about what they would want if they died? How young is too young?
I think, like we've been saying, it's not so much we're not so much saying have a conversation about dying. We're saying have a conversation about what's important to your life. And so sitting down with your kids and talking to them about stuff that makes them happy in a day and stuff they like doing, and really getting, having an open conversation of getting a sense of what's important to them is a conversation you can have at any age. So yeah, I think sitting down and going about it that way is a good way to do it with kids, as opposed to, okay, kids, one day what happens if you get sick? And nobody wants to have that conversation. But hey, what's a really good day for you? is a great conversation to have with a kid at any age.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Tan.
So a couple of things I wanted to add to that. So thank you, Tracy. Is if your children are old enough, and there's no, like you said, you know your children. I know my child. Like it's not an age thing. It's whether or not they're ready to have such conversations. And absolutely, like what makes a great day. And I can name off some things that my son would love. And so as a parent, you are the decision maker automatically for anybody under the age of 18. So I just wanted to clarify that ultimately you're the decision maker, but knowing what your child wants can be really important. And we've actually had some really hard cases nationally where there has actually been conflict between what a teenager wants and what their parents want. And so I think having those conversations is really important. And the flip side, that these children might be young adults if something happens to you. And so having this conversation so that you're preparing them not for death, not for your death, but really about if decisions need to be made when your child might be an older teenager or a young 20-year-old. Because I find that in my role as a hospice or a palliative care doc, that age is really hard for kind of young adult children to wrap their head around their parents being really that unwell. And it's it's a hard time in life where they're just trying to get their feet under them and things. So that would be lovely to be able to say, I've had these conversations all along with my parents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. Anything you want to add to the conversation with children, Marg?
I would just say the other thing is I think it's getting better, but there has been a tendency to protect children from dealing with death or experiencing anything to do with death. It's been really separate. And so I think allowing children to visit and explaining what's happening, I've seen that happen a few times recently at the hospital, and it's been just beautiful that grandchildren have been able to come and ask Nana questions. And Nana's been able to tell them that she's just not feeling well anymore and she loves them. And she left them the special teacup at home that they'll be able to remember her by. So it isn't that they go to hospital and they never see them again. They start to understand the whole life process, which I think really helps everybody. Yeah.
Thank you. So I just, to close, I want to read a couple more comments from participants. From Diane Zeck, I so need to have this conversation. Thank you for this opportunity. At this point, I feel like I know nothing. I'm going to have this conversation with my sister, and who is ill, apparently, who has a number of health conditions. Also, scrolling down, from Joan Dick, thank you for a great presentation, panelists. I do have the ACP package, time to dust it off and make a plan. Lots of time to do things like that these days. Joan's with us from James Bay. So I should correct something I said earlier. I said that questions and parts of questions that we haven't responded to here yet, we will be referring to your community hospice for them to connect with you and get back to you. And we're coming to the end of our time together. So I just want to say thank you once again to the panelists for your wisdom and experience and really a great conversation. Thank you. And thank you so much for people who are tuned in and participating, and thank you for the good questions. We are now moving to the, they've got the slide up about all of your local community hospices. So if you don't know how to reach out to your community hospice, the slide is here. This broadcast will be living on community hospice Facebook pages after the event, so it can be replayed. But also, if you don't know your local community hospice, you can go to the Vancouver Island Federation of Hospice website, which is VIFOH.org, and we're all listed there. And now I'm getting to that exciting moment, and I believe that the name has been drawn for our wonderful and generous gift from Country Grocer, $100 gift certificate. The winner Are we on that slide? Let's just wait for our slide turner to catch up. There we go. The winner is Phyllis Pond. Phyllis lives in Esquimalt. Woohoo! Great. Thank you. One last thank you to the panelists. Good to think about this. Great. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for participating.